Right now, it seems impossible to say how the Elbaf arc is going to end. Is Emu going to go and fight the Straw Hats and the Giants himself? Will they manage to drive him out? Will they be completely defeated? Or does Emu have another plan entirely? Well, as insane as it sounds, the ending was already spoiled for us by Oda in the first chapters of Elbaf. There is a pattern Oda has been using in recent arcs, where he uses the beginning of the arc to foreshadow the exact ending of the arc. What if I told you that the first 5 chapters of Elbaf, the seemingly throwaway, irrelevant plot of the Straw Hats in Legoland, actually gave us the exact beats of the rest of the Elbaf storyline point by point? And Elbaf has been following the same exact narrative as the Legoland storyline so far. And this also means that the conclusion of the Legoland storyline strongly foreshadows the conclusion of the Elbaf arc in general for us. This striking pattern of Oda writing a prologue for an arc that actually outlines the rest of the storyline first became clear in Wano, where the brief mini-arc at the beginning of the raid on Bakura Town actually spelled out, beat for beat, exactly how the eventual raid on Onigashima would go, and even exactly how Kaido would be defeated. Note that if I had recognized this earlier, then I would probably have skipped the raid will fail theory altogether, but hindsight is 20/20. And now that this pattern has emerged, we can see that Oda is using the same narrative device from Wano in Elbaf, with the Legoland plot of the Straw Hats going up against an evil, all-controlling god, not only spoiling the fact that Emu was going to be the main villain of Elbaf 25 chapters before he arrived, but the Legoland mini-arc also seemingly holds the truth to how the final battle of Elbaf in general will resolve. But before we get into it, make sure to subscribe. But first, if you want to use a high-quality VPN for less than $3 a month, Surfshark is offering that deal to my viewers right now. Surfshark VPN is the sponsor of this video, and in case you don't know what VPNs are, most people are using VPNs when they are online nowadays, as it's a necessity to make sure that your data does not get stolen. And Surfshark in particular can even warn you about scam emails. But the best part is that Surfshark VPN allows you to change your location online to anywhere you want on the globe. Let me tell you, that gives you so much more access to so many movies, TV shows, and live events that are all streaming for free, just in other countries. For example, there are anime that are free on Netflix streaming, but only in Japan. But with Surfshark, you can just change your location online to Japan and get free access with the click of a button. And if VPNs sound too good to be true, that's because most of them are pretty expensive. Most cost about $15 a month, but Surfshark is a world-class, award-winning VPN with over 4,500 servers in 140 locations that is offering my viewers a deal for less than $3 a month, and the best part is you can keep that price for up to 2 years. And on top of that, if you follow my link, you can get an extra 4 months free of Surfshark VPN. All you have to do is go to surfshark.com/Morge or use code Morge at checkout to get your Surfshark deal today for less than $3 a month and 4 extra months free. Just follow the link, or you can scan the QR code below. So before looking at Legoland, let me first explain this new narrative structure Oda seems to have started to follow for his major arcs, where the prologue spoils the rest of the storyline. The first time Oda experimented with this was in Wano. The story of Wano is obviously about the heroes all taking steps to prepare a big raid on Onigashima to defeat Kaido, but this main plot actually only begins about 10 chapters into the arc. The first 10 chapters are surprisingly spent on a much more lackadaisical, practically disconnected pet adventure for Luffy to help out his friend Tama by beating up Holden and bringing back food for a leftover village. Now, this was always a really strikingly different section of the Wano storyline, because while this section of the narrative was simple, clean, and focused on just Luffy's singular plot thread, the rest of Wano after this prologue turns into an absurdly convoluted web of ongoing plot threads of countless characters, with most chapters jam-packed with multiple cutaways to at least 3 different scenes, giving us some very messy and rushed storytelling. With Oda having so many plot threads and characters, and so much ground he had to cover across 150 chapters, it was extremely curious that Oda still chose to set aside 10 of those chapters at the very beginning to not delve into any of the important stuff, and instead just give us a fun little easy breezy adventure with no strings attached. Practically East Blue style storytelling. If Oda knew he had so much story to get through, then why was the simple low stakes Bakura Town raid so important to him to write before getting into the meat of Wano? Well, because it was important to Oda to test out a new narrative structure for his storytelling, using a short story at the beginning of the arc to foreshadow the events of the rest of the arc. What was the overall overall conflict of Wano ultimately about? The overall conflict of Wano can be summed up as this. The people of Wano are starving and oppressed. The oppressors, the beast pirates, reign in their own domain at Onigashima, separate from the people of Wano. The heroes plan a raid where they attack Onigashima, defeat the oppressive beast pirates, and then return to the people of Wano to reveal their victory, telling the people that they are now free and giving them back what the beast pirates took from them, so that the people of Wano can now live in prosperity. And so what happens in the prologue of Wano, in Luffy's Bakura Town mini-adventure to start the arc? Well, we are introduced to Leftover Village, and the people of Leftover Village are starving and oppressed. The oppressors, Hold'em and the Gifters, reign in their own domain at Bakura Town, separate from the people of Leftover Village. The heroes plan a raid where they attack Bakura Town, defeat the oppressors, and then return to the people of Leftover Town to reveal their victory, telling the people they are free and giving them back what the Gifters took from them, so that the people of Leftover Village can now live in prosperity. The two conflicts are direct mirrors of one another, with the same exact core issue. In general, the core concept of the Wano arc was about oppressors taking the resources of the weak, and the heroes making a journey to defeat the oppressors and return the resources to the weak. And Oda seemed to have decided that he really wanted to showcase that core concept in a miniature storyline, first and foremost, to tell us in advance exactly what Wano would be about, before proceeding with the rest of the arc. And what's even more interesting is that a lot of the little details line up remarkably closely as well. Hold'em and the Gifters take Tama captive before Luffy's raid on Bakura Town, just as the Beast Pirates take Momonosuke captive before the raid on Onigashima. And most interestingly, Hold'em essentially plays the Kaido figure of this mini storyline, the big bad boss of Bakura Town, this monster that must be defeated. And Luffy's final defeat of Hold'em mirrors Luffy's eventual defeat of Kaido. Hold'em launches a large fire attack, which Luffy's punch powers through to defeat Hold'em, just as the finale of Wano came down to a massive clash between Kaido's fire attack and Luffy's punch. And again, we see the parallel that the fight was prompted by Luffy's rage that Hold'em was hoarding food, just as Luffy's battle with Kaido culminated in Luffy's anger at Kaido hoarding food from the people of Wano country. So to sum up, Oda gave us the beat-for-beat plot for Wano right at the beginning, and now Oda has done the exact same thing in Elbaf, with an identical scenario of a short, completely self-contained, seemingly insignificant plot at the start of the arc, Legoland, which in fact seems to be spoiling the rest of the Elbaf arc right from the beginning. So what's interesting to me about the Legoland plot is that it actually felt even more disjointed from the rest of Elbaf than the Bakura Town raid felt from the rest of Wano. When Wano began, yes, it did feel odd that such a long, hyped up, high stakes storyline was beginning with such a comically low stakes and simplistic side quest that posed no challenge to the heroes. But at the very least, the Bakura Town raid was still technically part of the arc's overarching conflict. After all, it still involved fighting the Beast Pirates, even if it was the lowest of the low-level Beast Pirate grunts. But the Legoland plot is much more of an odd beginning. This was a literally self-contained mini-arc before the start of Elbaf. It genuinely takes place in its own miniature little world, a little bubble. And this plot goes on to have zero consequence on the rest of the Elbaf storyline, and does not in any way connect to the actual Elbaf conflict. In fact, the Legoland section could literally be straight up erased from the arc, and genuinely not a single thing about the plot changes. Just as a reminder, for those reading weekly during Legoland, at the time this mini-arc was going on, it seemed so random and pointless that readers were crafting theories week after week about how there must be something bigger going on here. Readers were pointing out inconsistencies in the Straw Hat's clothes, to argue that it might all be a hallucination, just to glean some sort of greater significance out of this whole thing. Why was Oda taking the time to write this instead of getting the Elbaf arc actually started? By the end of the Legoland plot, no greater significance was found among readers, and most of us just forgot about it and chalked it up as a random zero-stakes miniature adventure that Oda just felt like starting the arc with. However, the reason that readers, including myself, couldn't see how it tied into the rest of the Elbaf arc is because for the first 25 chapters of Elbaf, Oda didn't even reveal the true villain of the arc. It was only very deep into the storyline that suddenly Oda pulled back the curtain and revealed that Imu himself would be the the main boss of Elbaf. And with that reveal, all of a sudden the initial Legoland storyline was completely recontextualized. All along, Legoland was foreshadowing the rest of the conflict of Elbaf, just as Bakro Town foreshadowed the rest of the conflict of Wano. Legoland is a mini-arc where the villain is an all-controlling evil god. This god has declared it to be his world. Everything in this world is his to control. He considers himself to be all-powerful, and everyone else is simply a little doll for him to rule over. And specifically, this god is controlling a miniature land that is made to resemble Elbaf itself, with the citizens dressed as the Giants of Elbaf. This was a blatant setup for the actual Elbaf conflict that we are now getting. From the very first chapters of the arc, Oda essentially straight up told us that we would soon be fighting God himself in this storyline. Everything Roto says about being God, it being his world, controlling everyone, etc., etc., it all matches the speech of exactly one character in the story, and that is Imu. It's just that we didn't realize how blatantly Oda was foreshadowing the main villain of the arc for us right here, because none of us could have imagined that Imu would be the main villain of Elbaf, as Imu seemed to be a boss who was clearly being saved for much later in the final saga. At best, early on, readers were making predictions that the Gods Knights would be involved in the Elbaf arc, but no one thought that we'd be fighting Imu himself here. But this is exactly what great writers do. Everything from start to finish of a story is supposed to be thematically congruent. If Oda had actually written this entire Legoland section as a random series of chapters that had no symbolic meaning for the rest of Elbaf, then that would be pretty careless writing. So if anything, we all should have delved deeper from the get-go into why Oda was giving us this specific plotline, because of course there should have been a reason from the start. So taking all that into account, just as Bakura Town held the secrets to the rest of the Wano plot, what does Legoland tell us about the rest of Elbaf? Keeping in mind that Roto essentially represents Imu here, just as Hold'em represented Kaido. Well, to begin with, Imu's initial problem this arc was that the Holy Land, Marijoa, was on fire. Imu was actually angry about this before then discovering that the Straw Hats were on Elbaf, and only then did Imu insert himself into the battle against them. Similarly, in Legoland, Roto comes to discover that his quote-unquote holy temple has been set on fire, and he then discovers that the Straw Hats are running rampant in his Legoland and decides to eliminate them himself. The parallel is pretty specific and deliberate, especially considering the further similarities. Imu is particularly angry that his servants, the Gods Knights, were unable to take care of the Straw Hats, much like Roto's servants, aka his pets, failed to take care of the Straw Hats. I also find it very interesting that Chopper seems to be held as a special captive by Roto. Now this may be me reading too much into it, but I wonder if that possibly ties into Chopper's newfound significance that is being revealed in the Elbaf arc, with him potentially even having the Forest God fruit. Could Imu identify that Chopper is special and hold him captive for some time this arc, or at least perhaps aim to capture him in particular? But all that aside, let's get into the main question. What does Legoland tell us about how the Elbaf arc itself will resolve? It's already established that we're following the similar plot structure of Legoland through Elbaf so far, with the Straw Hats first exploring Elbaf, then defeating God's servants as they attempt to attack the Straw Hats, and then God himself coming down to try to punish the Straw Hats themselves, and even the same details of Legoland being set on fire, just as Elbaf is now on fire. But how did the whole Legoland plot play out in the end? Well, I think all signs point to Elbaf not yet being over, and that Imu is going to personally involve himself further as the main villain of the arc. So with that in mind, is the Elbaf climax set to be a scenario where the Straw Hats are victorious against Imu and drive him out of the land? Or if this is meant to be a crushing defeat for the Straw Hats so that Oda can really show off the power of God? I personally believe that either route that the story goes is not going to go to the extreme. By that, I mean that if the Straw Hats are victorious, it's obviously not going to be a permanent victory. Imu is just too important to the narrative to be permanently defeated here. And on the other hand, if the heroes are set to lose in Elbaf, I don't think that it will be a Sabaody-esque defeat where they are completely crushed and scattered. I don't think the Straw Hats are being taken captive either. Rather, I think that at worst it may end with them being overwhelmed and needing to escape. Looking at the end of Elbaf, the big finale of it is the Straw Hats managing to escape Legoland and getting away from God. Just like Bakura Town ended with the victorious heroes returning to the starving people to give them food and freedom, foreshadowed exactly how Wano ended, I wonder if this Legoland conclusion suggests that we are heading towards the Straw Straw Hats having to escape Elbaf in the end. It's possible that Elbaf itself may be destroyed in the process, as in Norse mythology, the final war begins as the Yggdrasil tree decays and burns. This would signal the start of the final war as the Straw Hats and the Giants flee the destroyed, burning Elbaf tree. However, we could also look at the flip side, which is that interestingly, Legoland ends with God being defeated by a giant lightning bolt. Now, I always thought this was really interesting. Why did Oda choose Nami of all people to defeat the main villain of the Legoland mini-arc? Initially, I thought it might be a good sign that Elbaf was going to be an important arc for Nami, but obviously that doesn't seem to be the case. Nami doesn't really do much in this arc so far. However, this suggests to me that it was never about Nami in the first place, it was about the lightning. The important visual was God being defeated by lightning in the Legoland mini-arc. Thinking back to Luffy's punch defeating Hold'em's fire attack, and how that was a preview of the final clash of Wano as a whole, with Luffy's giant punch defeating Kaido's giant fire attack, and considering how right now in Elbaf the main character of the arc is Loki, the lightning dragon, and the main villain is the evil god Imu, I really think that Roto being struck down by lightning here at the end of Legoland seems like it could be foreshadowing Loki's role in driving out Imu. Now, this route makes more sense if Elbaf is set to have a victorious finale for our heroes. Now again, I don't believe that it's possible for Imu to be permanently defeated here, so maybe we're looking at a combination of possibilities. Perhaps the heroes are set to escape Elbaf in the end, but they're also going to be able to drive God back in the process, just as in Legoland. For Loki to be the one to get the last shot, or at least to be able to play a pivotal role against Imu, makes a lot of sense, as Loki is ultimately the #1 character in Elbaf, and really the entire world who has the most personal vendetta against Imu. Imu is the one who personally manipulated and caused the death of the two figures that Loki admired the most, Rox and Herald. Imu is the reason Loki became an outcast of Elbaf. Imu is essentially the enemy that Loki set out to see to defeat. Oda showing us a preview of lightning striking down God in the Legoland prologue makes a lot of sense if we consider that this may be Loki's time to get a bit of payback on the god who has been tormenting him for so long. Loki has also been adamant that he will protect Elbaf, which makes more sense if he is able to actually defend his people against God, rather than all the heroes and the giants of Elbaf facing a crushing defeat. This also plays into Elbaf's general positive themes about rising up and standing up again, which would probably be directly contradicted if the arc actually ends in defeat for all of the protagonists. I also find it hard to imagine how Usopp could manage to still have the grand moment we are all hoping for him to have if this arc is set up to be a Sabaody situation for the Straw Hats. So with all that being taken into account, what does it look like? Which way will the Elbaf conflict play out? The Legends are here! This month you can get our brand new collection, the Legends Poster Collection. 12 dynamically illustrated One Piece legends with 12 hidden iconic moments. Get Fiery Ace with his hidden Battle of Destiny. Get the Defiant Roger with his hidden legendary laugh. Or, for this month only, you can get Grinning Loki with a hidden tragedy, and many more. And this month, you can buy 2 posters and get any 3 free with the deal auto-applied at checkout. And that's not just from this collection. You can buy 2, get 3 from any posters you like, spanning all of our collections, including past boss posters, island posters, and ships posters. The buy 2, get 3 free deal is only running for this month, and Loki's poster will be gone from our store forever after this month, so make sure you get your deal today by hitting the link in the description below. Considering the Legoland ending is ambiguous, this is a case where genuinely I can see multiple interpretations. If the arc is truly heading for defeat for the heroes, then of course Oda isn't going to write the Straw Hats being handed a crushing defeat in the prologue by Roto of all people, so the simple fact that the Straw Hats are triumphant in the end of Legoland doesn't tell us everything on its own. You can interpret the Legoland ending either way, that we're set to conclude Elbaf with the heroes escaping, or with the heroes getting a victory over God. Or perhaps even a more down-the-middle result like we got in Whole Cake Island, where the heroes did get a sort of moral victory over Big Mom, but at the same time, it felt a lot muddier and less triumphant than a true traditional victory. As you all know, I personally would absolutely love for the heroes to face defeat. I think One Piece is at its best when Oda is willing to make his protagonists suffer a little and actually experience the weight of failure, and in the final saga, that is more important than ever. However, at the same time, I'm not saying that has to happen here, or even at the hands of Imu in general, just that we do need a meaningful defeat that actually affects the heroes to happen at some point in the final saga in order for Oda to reach the dramatic highs of the past. It could even happen happen at the hands of Blackbeard in the next arc, who knows? At this point, all we can say is that we have the pieces of the rest of the arc right in front of us. We know that God is coming to punish those who disobey, just as happened in Legoland. We know that it seems like the heroes are able to escape in the end in Legoland, and we know that the final blow against God seems to be a giant blast of lightning in Legoland, which just so happens to play into the primary hero-villain conflict that has been set up in Elbaf today. So with all this in mind, I encourage you to go read through the early chapters of the Elbaf arc with fresh eyes, and see how you interpret these events yourself. Treat it like the Harley, Oda's way of teasing the future for us without spelling it outright, because it's becoming more and more apparent that Oda is aiming to stuff these new extended prologues for storylines with as many clues as possible to help us understand the upcoming ideas and conflict of each arc. So let me know in the comments below how you think Legoland suggests that Elbaf will end, and if you enjoyed this video then definitely like and subscribe. And if you want to hear how Oda may have used something similar to the prologue method in other One Piece arcs, then you can listen to my weekly podcast that just dropped by becoming a member or by supporting me on Patreon, link in the description below. And make sure to get your Surfshark deal for less than $3 a month and 4 extra months free by going to surfshark.com/Morge or using code Morge at checkout, link in the description below, or scan the QR code.